They called him the wisest prince who ever lived. Cosimo de Medici controlled the most powerful banking empire in Europe, commanded the loyalty of emperors and popes, and ruled Florence from behind a veil of humility so masterful that his enemies couldn't even identify him as a threat. While other wealthy men built palaces that screamed their superiority, Cosimo chose modest designs. While other rulers flaunted their power, he spoke softly and deferred to others in public. While other elites surrounded themselves with luxury, he dressed like a merchant and walked the streets alone. And here's what no one understood. This wasn't kindness. This wasn't genuine humility. This was survival. Because Cosimo had discovered something that would destroy most leaders who ignore it. Something so dangerous that Machiavelli would later write about it as one of the deadliest forces in politics. Something that kills more careers, destroys more relationships, and topples more kingdoms than war itself. Envy. But not just any envy. The specific kind of envy that erupts when someone appears too perfect, too successful, too untouchable. The kind that turns allies into enemies, friends into saboteurs, supporters into silent assassins. Machiavelli called it the weed that should never be watered. Modern psychology calls it one of the most destructive emotions in human nature. And if you've ever wondered why some people seem to attract hatred for no logical reason, why competence sometimes breeds contempt, why excellence can become a target, then you're about to understand one of the most brutal laws of human behavior. Because what I'm going to show you isn't just theory. It's a pattern that repeats throughout history, from biblical times to boardrooms today. A pattern that explains why Joseph's coat of many colors nearly got him killed. Why brilliant startups implode from within. Why talented individuals find themselves isolated and attacked by the very people they've helped. The truth is this: perfection is not admirable. It's threatening. Flawlessness doesn't inspire. It intimidates. And when you appear to have no weaknesses, no struggles, no human flaws, you don't become a role model. You become a target. Machiavelli understood this with surgical precision. He saw that envy operates differently from other forms of hatred. Fear can be managed through strength. Anger can be channeled or avoided. But envy grows in silence. It festers in the minds of those who feel diminished by your apparent superiority. It turns ordinary people into calculating enemies who smile to your face while sharpening knives behind your back. And here's the part that will shock you. The solution isn't to become less capable, less successful, or less excellent. The solution is to master the art of strategic imperfection, to understand when and how to reveal calculated flaws that make you human without making you weak, to know the difference between being humble and being forgettable, to learn how power can be maintained not through dominance, but through relatability. This isn't about deception. This is about survival in a world where your strengths can become your greatest vulnerabilities if you don't know how to manage them. Let me start with a story that Machiavelli himself would have recognized. A story about a young man who possessed everything that others envied: talent, favor, authority, and a complete blindness to how his perfection was slowly poisoning everyone around him. His name was Joseph, and his story begins with a coat. Not just any coat. A coat of many colors, woven with threads of gold and crimson. A masterpiece that announced to everyone who saw it that this 17-year-old boy was different, special, chosen. While his 11 brothers wore rough work garments stained with sweat and dirt, Joseph walked among them draped in nobility. While they labored in fields under the scorching sun, he remained clean, untouched, elevated. The coat wasn't just clothing, it was a declaration. A visible reminder that their father loved Joseph more than any of them, that Joseph's future held promise while theirs held only toil, that in the hierarchy of their family, Joseph stood alone at the top, unreachable and untouchable. But Joseph didn't stop there. He couldn't recognize the growing poison in his brother's eyes because he was too intoxicated by his own specialness. When dreams came to him, dreams of wheat sheaves bowing down, dreams of stars and moon prostrating themselves before him, he shared them with the excitement of someone who believes his greatness will be celebrated, rather than resented. He told his brothers about visions of their submission. He described futures where they would serve him. He painted pictures of his inevitable authority with the innocent cruelty of someone who has never learned that superiority, when flaunted, becomes a weapon pointed at your own heart. And his brothers listened. They nodded, they smiled, and inside, something dark began to grow. Because here's what Joseph never understood. His brothers weren't angry at his dreams. They were envious of his reality. The coat, the favor, the effortless success, the apparent blessing that followed him everywhere while they struggled for scraps of attention. Joseph appeared to live in a different universe, one where everything came easily, where problems solved themselves, where divine favor flowed like water. John Chrysostom, the ancient theologian, captured the essence of what was happening when he wrote that envy is a terrible passion that doesn't leave the soul before bringing it to an extremely sorry state. Joseph's brothers were being consumed from within, their love gradually replaced by something far more dangerous, something that would eventually drive them to plot his destruction. Because that's what envy does. It doesn't create dramatic confrontations or honest battles. It creates conspiracies. It turns family members into strangers, friends into enemies, supporters into saboteurs. It operates in whispers and shadows, building strength while wearing the mask of loyalty. Joseph never saw it coming. How could he? He was too perfect to notice the imperfection he was creating in others, too blessed to recognize the curse his blessings were becoming for everyone around him, too elevated to see that his height was pushing others into darkness. And when the moment came, when his brothers finally acted on the poison that had been building for years, Joseph found himself at the bottom of a pit, his coat of many colors torn and bloody, his dreams seemingly shattered, his perfection finally revealing its true cost. But Joseph's story is just the beginning. Because what happened to him in ancient times happens every day in modern boardrooms, social circles, families, and organizations. The pattern remains the same. Someone appears too perfect, too successful, too untouchable. Others begin to feel diminished by comparison. Envy takes root in silence. And eventually, the perfect person discovers that their strengths have become their greatest weaknesses. Machiavelli witnessed this pattern throughout his political career in Renaissance Florence. He saw brilliant leaders destroyed not by external enemies, but by internal envy. He watched talented individuals sabotaged by colleagues who couldn't tolerate their excellence. He observed families torn apart by resentment toward the most successful members, and from these observations, he developed insights that remain as relevant today as they were 500 years ago. Insights about the psychology of envy, the dangers of appearing flawless, and the strategies that truly powerful people use to maintain their position without triggering the destructive emotions of those around them. Because the truth is this: in a world where everyone is struggling with their own insecurities, limitations, and failures, the person who appears to have none becomes a living reminder of what others lack. They become a mirror that reflects inadequacy rather than a light that inspires improvement. And this creates a psychological phenomenon that most people never recognize until it destroys them. When you excel without apparent effort, when you succeed without visible struggle, when you navigate challenges that break others, you don't inspire admiration. You inspire something far more dangerous. You inspire the belief that your success is somehow stolen from their potential, that your elevation requires their diminishment, that your light can only exist by casting them into shadow. Elizabeth Holmes understood this intuitively. The young Stanford dropout who built Theranos into a billion-dollar empire knew that appearing perfect wasn't just advantageous, it was essential. She crafted an image of flawless brilliance, revolutionary vision, and unwavering confidence. She spoke in a voice that commanded authority, wore black turtlenecks that suggested genius, and promised medical breakthroughs that seemed almost divine. For years, this strategy worked. Investors threw money at her feet. Media outlets crowned her the youngest female billionaire. Board members with decades of experience deferred to her judgment without question. She appeared untouchable, infallible, destined for greatness. But beneath the surface, something else was growing. Employees who questioned her methods were silenced. Scientists who raised concerns about the technology were dismissed. Anyone who dared suggest that the emperor might be wearing no clothes was eliminated from the inner circle. Holmes had made the fatal mistake that Machiavelli warned against. She had appeared too perfect for too long. She had created an image so flawless that any crack would bring the entire structure crashing down. And when those cracks finally appeared, when the technology failed to deliver on its promises, when the lies became impossible to maintain, the envy that had been building in silence exploded into public fury. The same investors who had worshipped her brilliance now competed to condemn her deception. The same media that had celebrated her vision now raced to expose her fraud. The same society that had elevated her to godlike status now demanded her complete destruction, because that's what happens when perfection reveals itself to be performance. The fall isn't just dramatic, it's personal. People don't just want justice, they want revenge for being made to feel inadequate by someone who was ultimately no better than they were. This is the brutal mathematics of envy. The higher you rise without showing your humanity, the more violent your eventual fall becomes. The more perfect you appear, the more people invest their own sense of inadequacy in your downfall. The more untouchable you seem, the more satisfaction others derive from watching you bleed. Machiavelli saw this pattern repeat endlessly in the political arena. Leaders who appeared invincible were toppled not by superior armies, but by internal betrayal. Rulers who seemed blessed by divine favor were destroyed by subjects who had grown tired of feeling cursed by comparison. Princes who projected flawless authority discovered that their strength had created a vacuum of resentment that eventually consumed them. And from these observations, Machiavelli developed a counterintuitive strategy. Instead of hiding weakness, strategic leaders should reveal it selectively. Instead of projecting perfection, they should display calculated flaws. Instead of appearing untouchable, they should create points of connection that allow others to feel superior in small, harmless ways. This isn't about becoming weak. It's about becoming human. It's about understanding that power maintained through relatability lasts longer than power maintained through intimidation. It's about recognizing that the leader who allows others to feel valuable is far more secure than the leader who makes others feel worthless. Consider the difference in approach. The perfect leader never admits mistakes, never shows uncertainty, never reveals struggle. They float above human experience like a deity, untouched by the problems that plague ordinary mortals. And while this might seem impressive, it creates an emotional distance that eventually breeds resentment. The strategically imperfect leader, however, operates differently. They excel in their core competencies, but acknowledge limitations in other areas. They achieve remarkable results while sharing credit generously. They demonstrate strength while admitting to moments of doubt. They maintain authority while revealing enough humanity to remain relatable. This approach serves multiple psychological functions. It gives others permission to have flaws of their own. It creates opportunities for genuine connection rather than one-sided admiration. It provides social proof that success is achievable for mortals, not just for the divinely gifted. And most importantly, it removes the psychological trigger that transforms ordinary people into envious enemies. But here's where the strategy becomes truly sophisticated. The flaws you reveal must be carefully chosen. They should be harmless imperfections that don't undermine your core competencies. They should be relatable struggles that others can identify with. They should be human moments that create connection without creating doubt about your ability to perform when it matters. A brilliant strategist might admit to being terrible at remembering names while demonstrating perfect recall for complex business details. A successful entrepreneur might confess to struggling with work-life balance while showing complete mastery of their industry. A gifted leader might acknowledge their tendency toward impatience while displaying remarkable wisdom in major decisions. These admissions serve as psychological pressure valves. They give others something to feel superior about without threatening your position. They create opportunities for people to offer help or advice, which satisfies their need to feel valuable. They demonstrate that your success comes from focused excellence rather than supernatural gifts. The ancient Romans understood this principle through their tradition of the triumph parade. When a victorious general returned from campaign, he would be granted a magnificent procession through the streets of Rome. Citizens would line the roads, cheering his achievements and celebrating his glory. But behind the general, standing in his chariot, would be a slave whose sole purpose was to whisper in his ear, "Remember, you are mortal." This wasn't cruelty. This was wisdom. The Romans recognized that unchecked elevation leads to hubris, and hubris leads to downfall. By institutionalizing humility, by forcing even the most successful leaders to acknowledge their humanity, they created a system that channeled achievement without triggering the destructive envy that had destroyed so many other civilizations. Modern research validates what Machiavelli and the Romans understood intuitively. Studies in organizational psychology show that leaders who display appropriate vulnerability are more trusted, more liked, and more effective than those who project flawless competence. Teams perform better under leaders who acknowledge uncertainty while maintaining direction. Employees show greater loyalty to managers who admit mistakes while demonstrating learning. The key word is appropriate. This isn't about becoming a confessional booth or turning leadership into therapy. It's about strategic authenticity that serves both your effectiveness and your survival. It's about understanding that in a world full of imperfect people, the appearance of perfection isn't an asset, it's a liability. The psychology behind this runs deeper than most people realize. When someone appears perfect, they don't just trigger envy. They trigger a primal fear. The fear that excellence is finite. That success is a zero-sum game. That someone else's light must necessarily dim your own. This isn't logical. This isn't rational. This is ancient wiring in the human brain that treats social hierarchies like life or death competitions. When your ancestors saw someone who appeared to have unlimited resources, unlimited favor, unlimited advantage, their survival instincts screamed danger. Because in a world of scarcity, someone else's abundance meant your potential starvation. That same wiring still fires today. When a colleague appears effortlessly brilliant, when a friend seems blessed with perfect relationships, when a competitor demonstrates flawless execution, something primitive awakens in the observer. Not admiration, not inspiration, but the cold calculation of threat assessment. And this is where most people make their fatal mistake. They believe that competence speaks for itself, that excellence will naturally be celebrated, that being the best automatically makes you the most valuable. They operate under the dangerous illusion that merit alone determines outcomes. Machiavelli would have laughed at such naivety. He understood that human beings don't respond to reality. They respond to perception. And the perception of perfection doesn't create allies. It creates enemies who are too sophisticated to reveal their true intentions. Because here's what envy does that other emotions don't. It makes people cunning. Fear makes people retreat. Anger makes people attack directly. But envy makes people strategic. It turns them into chess players who think 17 moves ahead. It transforms ordinary individuals into patient assassins who smile while they position the knife. The envious don't charge into battle. They whisper doubts about your character. They question your methods in meetings. They plant seeds of suspicion about your motives. They highlight your few failures while downplaying your many successes. They operate like psychological termites, weakening the foundation of your reputation one small bite at a time. And the most dangerous part? They often don't even realize they're doing it. Envy operates in the subconscious, disguising itself as legitimate criticism, reasonable concern, or objective analysis. The person undermining you genuinely believes they're being fair. They've convinced themselves that their resentment is actually insight, that their attempts to diminish you are really attempts to restore balance. This is why Machiavelli emphasized that envy is often invisible to those who feel it. They don't wake up plotting your destruction. They simply notice things. They remember your mistakes more vividly than your successes. They interpret your confidence as arrogance. They reframe your achievements as luck. They gradually reconstruct the narrative of who you are until you become the villain in their story. And once that transformation is complete, once you've been reclassified from ally to threat, everything changes. Your strengths become evidence of your danger. Your success becomes proof of your unworthiness. Your very existence becomes an insult to their sense of justice. This is what happened to Joseph. His brothers didn't plot his destruction because he was evil. They plotted it because his goodness made them feel evil by comparison. His favor made them feel abandoned. His dreams made them feel dreamless. His coat made them feel naked. The tragedy is that Joseph never intended to harm anyone. He was guilty of nothing more than being blessed, while others felt cursed. But intention becomes irrelevant when envy takes root. The envious don't care about your motives. They only care about the pain your excellence causes them to feel about themselves. Modern workplaces are littered with similar casualties. Brilliant employees who were edged out not because they performed poorly, but because they performed too well. Talented managers who found themselves isolated not because they failed to lead, but because they led too effectively. Innovative thinkers who were silenced, not because their ideas were wrong, but because their ideas made others feel intellectually inadequate. The pattern is always the same. Excellence creates distance. Distance breeds resentment. Resentment finds reasons to justify itself. And eventually, those reasons become weapons. But Machiavelli discovered something that changes everything. Something that separates the leaders who survive from those who burn. Something that Cosimo de Medici mastered so completely that he ruled Florence for 30 years without ever officially holding power. The secret isn't to become less excellent. It's to make your excellence feel accessible. It's to demonstrate that your success comes from human effort, not divine blessing. It's to show that you've struggled, failed, learned, and grown just like everyone else. That your achievements are the result of applied intelligence, not inherited superiority. When you reveal the work behind the magic, you transform envy into aspiration. When you acknowledge the failures that preceded your successes, you give others permission to fail on their way to their own victories. When you admit the limitations that still constrain you, you create space for others to feel valuable despite their own constraints. This is what Cosimo understood when he rejected the Grand Palace design. He wasn't hiding his wealth. He was making it digestible. He was saying, through architecture, that success doesn't require separation from humanity. That power doesn't demand isolation from community. That excellence can coexist with humility. Every decision Cosimo made reinforced this message. He dressed like a merchant while thinking like an emperor. He spoke like a citizen while operating like a king. He appeared in public like a neighbor while commanding resources like a god. This wasn't deception. This was emotional intelligence at the highest level, because Cosimo had learned what most leaders never discover: that the appearance of effortless superiority is far more dangerous than the reality of hard-earned success. That people can forgive you for being better than them, but they cannot forgive you for making it look easy. That they can accept your achievements, but they cannot accept the implication that achievement is simple. The modern equivalent would be the tech billionaire who talks openly about the 18-hour days, the failed startups, the moments of crippling doubt, who shares stories of sleeping on office floors and eating ramen for months, who admits to the depression that followed early failures and the imposter syndrome that still haunts late-night moments. This isn't weakness. This is strategy. Because when you humanize your success, you make it inspiring rather than intimidating. When you reveal the struggle behind the triumph, you give others a roadmap rather than a reminder of their inadequacy. When you show that excellence requires effort, you transform envy into respect. But here's the crucial distinction. The vulnerability you reveal must be authentic, but it must also be strategic. You cannot expose weaknesses that undermine your core competencies. You cannot admit to failures that suggest incompetence. You cannot show struggles that make others question your ability to perform when performance matters. The art lies in choosing imperfections that make you relatable without making you unreliable. Flaws that create connection without creating doubt. Struggles that demonstrate humanity without suggesting inability. A master surgeon might admit to terrible handwriting while demonstrating perfect precision in the operating room. A brilliant strategist might confess to being hopeless at small talk while displaying flawless judgment in high-stakes negotiations. A successful entrepreneur might acknowledge their tendency to overthink personal decisions while showing crystal-clear thinking in business matters. These admissions serve multiple functions simultaneously. They give others areas where they can feel superior. They create opportunities for genuine bonding over shared human struggles. They demonstrate that your success in critical areas comes from focused development rather than natural gifts. And most importantly, they remove the psychological threat that triggers envious behavior. This is the paradox that most people never grasp. Showing strategic weakness actually increases your power. Admitting to specific limitations enhances your overall credibility. Revealing calculated flaws makes your genuine strengths appear more impressive, not less. Because when people see that you're human in some areas, They trust your excellence in others. When they understand that your success required sacrifice and struggle, they respect the achievement rather than resent it. When they recognize that you've paid a price for your position, they're less likely to begrudge you the benefits. This is how Cosimo ruled Florence for 3 decades, while other powerful families rose and fell like waves. This is how he accumulated more wealth than any other citizen while maintaining the love of the people. This is how he exercised absolute authority while never appearing to threaten anyone's autonomy. He mastered the most sophisticated form of power, power that operates through attraction rather than intimidation, power that creates loyalty rather than fear, power that inspires others to protect your position because they see it as compatible with their own aspirations rather than threatening to their own dignity. The lesson extends far beyond politics and business. It applies to every relationship, every social circle, every family dynamic. The friend who appears to have the perfect marriage, the perfect children, the perfect career, the perfect life creates unconscious resentment in others, not because they wish harm, but because perfection feels like accusation. But the friend who shares the struggles behind the success, who admits to the work required to maintain what appears effortless, who acknowledges the trade-offs and sacrifices, becomes an inspiration rather than an irritation. Their success becomes evidence of possibility rather than proof of unfairness. This is the difference between being admired and being trusted, between being respected and being loved, between being elevated and being isolated, between surviving success and being destroyed by it. The next time you find yourself excelling, remember Cosimo's wisdom. Let others see the scaffolding behind your success. Share the failures that taught you. Admit the struggles that shaped you. Not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to understand that perfection is a cage that only you hold the key to. Because in a world where everyone is fighting their own battles with inadequacy, the person who appears to have no battles becomes everyone else's enemy. But the person who shows their scars while wearing their crown, they become untouchable.